Oliver Stone, thank you very much for sitting down with me for this interview. I really do appreciate it.
Well, anybody called Primo Nutmeg deserves my attention.
Well, thank you. So I wanted to speak with you, about politics a little bit today, but I am a huge fan of all of your films. I just want to start off asking you, because you made so many classic films working with so many different actors. Was there any actors in particular that you were really fond of working with?
No, I had, it's a long journey you're asking me to describe, because there were so many people along the way, good people and sometimes not so good, and it was hard to, but most of the actors I got along with beautifully well, and I enjoyed working with them very much, some less so. The greatest performances perhaps were, among others, was Anthony Hopkins in Nixon. I just remember that as a wonderful acting performance, and Joan Allen too. I mean, they were the details of their performance. But, you'd have to look at Anthony. Of course, Pacino always. He was in Any Given Sunday, and he played a coach, an aging football coach. I thought he was fascinating. Michael Douglas became quite famous for his second role in Wall Street. And Tom Cruise was, I think, vastly underrated when he did Born on the 4th of July. I think he deserves an Oscar for that. He was just wonderful performance. It was intense, committed. Played Ron Kovic. And then you go back to all this. There's so many other roles. I mean, I don't want to leave out anybody, frankly.
Was there any actor who you just particularly loved working with, who was easy to work with and just seemed to get it very quickly?
Well, when a good actor is a good actor, you get along with him. It goes smoothly. I mean, Hopkins was nervous at first about the size of the role, and he was English and he was Welsh, and I think that he's a professional, as is Pacino, so you work with him. I didn't have problems at all. I would say the problems would always come with people who were perhaps just had problems with their own ego, that this acting profession is very difficult because you have to yield to, who are you, and you yield to the role. And for me, the most important thing is the idea of the film. I mean, that's king, queen. I'm beholden to that. When the day that we shoot and during the rehearsal, it's just I'm given over to that. I'm serving that idea. In that regard, we're all serving that idea, and it's a hierarchy of, we agree to agree. We have to. I mean, there has to be a director at the top of he's the organizer, but the actors are major contributors, and they know it. But we should try to find, if we have differences, we should try to find them in rehearsal before we start shooting.
So Nixon and W are two of my favorite films, and what's really interesting about them is that I think that you're critical of both Richard Nixon and George W. Bush, but you also do seem to humanize them a bit and show them as real people. Is that an accurate interpretation, would you say?
I always tried to. In all the films I did, whether I went from Nixon to somebody as opposite as Jim Morrison, I always tried to get into the shoes of George Bush. As you know, I have strong reservations about his presidency, the worst president I think we ever had. Nixon was no cup of tea either, but I think I understood him. I think we have to understand people who are not like us, who think differently. That's the beauty of it. You go to other countries, you journey in these paths. For example, Snowden is the last film I did. He's a colder character than I am. He's different. But I admired his action as a persona, as a dramatic persona. He's not that fascinating because he's very kind of quiet, and he's more of an internal computer person than an external actor. But I admired that action. I made the movie on that basis. But I certainly got to know him and got into those shoes. And I would say that's true across the board. Alexander, it was just a whole trip, man. That was another trip into another time. And I did 4 versions of it. The 4th version, finally, I think I got down to I think I solved my problems with it. It was just too big a film to make under a 3-hour limit. What else? Getting into the shoes of people that you don't understand would certainly come under George Bush the most. But
well, that's what I think makes it the most interesting, because
Scarface. I was going to say Scarface too. I mean, I'm not a gangster, but I was a gangster. Part of me was a gangster. In other words, I had a wild personality back then. Back in the early 80s. I mean, I was feeling my oats as a young man, and I had a lot of it. I still do. I have a lot of problems with the system.
Right.
And I always tend to, the moment, you see these gangsters from the 1930s, you understand what it is about this system that drives you crazy. They always, and in those days, they used to condemn the gangster. You had to condemn the gangster, have them kill him off. Well, we had the same problem in 1983 when we made Scarface. It was still, we had to condemn him in the sense that Hollywood hated that film. It was like saying, he's this scumbag. How can you like this guy? And how can you even make a movie that in any way, you understand that that morality is still Puritan morality, going back to your Connecticut days, is still with us.
I'm sure it was the case with Natural Born Killers also.
Oh God, I loved working with Woody and Juliet and Downey at that point, because that was when Downey was normal, when he was having fun, and we were all having fun. Woody is one of the coolest guys, and I'm glad I got to work with him early in his life. But the reason, the shit the film took, but I mean every film, JFK for Christ's sake, Costner gave a great performance, underrated, and Tommy Lee Jones, Gary Oldman, Joe Pesci, Donald Sutherland. There was a cast of 10, 11, 12 people that were stunning. They created for me a world that, they wanted me to apologize for. I can't. I can't apologize for Scarface or Midnight Express or any of them. I feel really strongly that each film is justified and I can go back in any single case. But God, what a struggle it's been in this business to put an identity on each film. In other words, especially now, I think it's gotten harder with the corporate world getting stronger all the time to actually get films made under some kind of identity.
Well, that's one criticism I have to say of Hollywood that I have overall is just when you look at the arc of these great films, from previous decades, there were so many great films, and now it seems like there's fewer and fewer. And what I was going to ask you about, too, is have you seen this new film, The Joker?
No, I haven't. What?
You had that film and then also The Dark Knight previously. It seems like the real Hollywood art that are coming out, they're having to do with comic book movies, which is kind of strange. And I don't know if maybe there's sort of a juvenile aspect to that.
Well, I think you're looking at that. Yeah, that everyone pointing to that, and everyone's saying the same thing. It's easy to condemn movies. Everyone criticizes movies, as one of our, I forgot which producer said, there's one business that everyone is in. It's the movie business.
Right.
Everyone knows. My father used to take me to movies and say, kiddo, we could have done that better. It's inevitable and that's it does pain you to make a movie and see that there's always different ways to do it, and people criticize you. I do think the comic book thing, because it became so financially lucrative, got out of hand. And it's one after the other, and you lose count of what's going on. But my problem started earlier than that with Terminator type movies, where I noticed that they, for the sake of story continuation, story tension, they would kill off a character, and then he'd get up again.
Right.
And it once worked, but my God, they started to the Terminator especially overindulged it. The guy would be killed or this or that, and he'd get up again. Okay, fine, and then the story can go on.
Right.
But that doesn't work for me dramatically, except a few times. So that I get when I go to these new ones. Frankly, I'm so bored. I don't know. There's nothing at stake because no one dies. It seems.
Well, and it seems like everything nowadays is a remake, a reboot, a sequel, a prequel.
Think about the concept of death. Unless there's death, a termination of this thing.
Right.
I lose interest because it's not a human being anymore. It's somebody. There's a god or something of a immortal nature. We may have immortal natures, but let's prove it. Most of these new movies, it is done by committees. You have to admit. I don't know the names of the directors. They might be very talented, they might be great art directors, they might be great organizers, this, that, but you have a feeling when you see the movies that 6, 7, 8 people are really involved. And I had that problem in my career too at times. I could see the hand, that it's a natural takeover hand of the executives. They want to be involved, they love movies, it's a good motivation, but you get this kind of consensus that you can't do this from the studio. And you can only do this kind of thing. And I felt that pressure. I think every filmmaker, except maybe a few, feel it. They feel it, and it comes down on them. And I felt it, especially when I started to go in that direction of W. Alexander too, because I had to it was financed really out of Europe. So when I started to hit that place, I could feel it. W was impossible to finance here. It was done out of Jesus. It was done with Hong Kong investor and some European investors. But it was really tough to get that made, and there wasn't a lot of money. But what was that? A sitting president who violated everything.
Right.
That passed the Patriot Act with wars. They didn't want to touch it. So the concept of self-criticism in this country, which I had used to make films in the 90s and the 80s, was abandoned after the Patriot Act was passed, after we became a very tightened up pro-American. It became, you had to make kind of a pro-American cinema. In other words, you can't even suggest, you can suggest certain things are wrong, but you certainly cannot mention the foreign policy or the military or the sense of a sacred power that we have as a so-called democracy of freedom and light, And that becomes very tricky for filmmakers, and they shy away from it. They shy away from it, and then you lose a certain diet, you lose a certain color in the food. It's not the same. It's not the same spice. I had a harder and harder time, and my career suffered from it. And then because I followed my own instincts, I made documentaries, as you know, and one of them was The Untold History of the United States. Was a demarker for me. That was 2000. Came out in 2013, 14.
It was a wonderful series. It was very educational.
It took a lot of work. But as you know, we were very tough, and we said, this is what the country has done. We were very honest. We fact-checked everything. It wasn't received. I mean, it was the progressive historians and certainly the audience really appreciated it, and I get there's a lot of mention of it, but still, you don't see it in the mainstream. And that's sort of where I've been going on. I had to go because I followed my heart. I interviewed Mr. Putin. That was also very interesting to those who watched it.
Right.
It was a 4-hour series, and I let him talk. But of course, the usual, your soft, what do you call it? The softballing questions. It's nonsense. I mean, look at the series. Spend time in those 4 hours. You're going to see a real journey across a man's mind, and you're going to get to know that man, which is what the whole point of the thing was. But that's a direction that doesn't work for the new America, which seems to have come into being with George W. Bush. Mr. Obama, as you know, I supported him at the beginning, and he really never took us away from that position. We stayed in that mold, the war on terror, the whole lockup of the country, the security state, the surveillance state. It's all been downhill since 2000, since his presidency. And you know what? I knew it the night of 2000, what was it, October 2000, so November 2000. I felt it that night. Something was wrong. I didn't, the Florida thing, who knew? But it became very clear that it was stolen afterward. But it's so ridiculous that all of this is clocked off since then. One thing after another.
We're talking about spying. Obviously, Obama really ramped that up. But I think that...
Whistleblowers.
Right. I think that has gotten worse and worse, and what's added fuel to the fire is also the new Cold War that we're in, and you see that with what's happened with Julian Assange, because I personally believe that they have been given cover to arrest him and persecute him because of what happened in 2016. I mean, do you think that's an accurate assessment?
What in your
with how he's been tied into the Russiagate thing?
But I saw Julian several times before that, so I was always on his... I mean, obviously, I knew a lot about that case, and I empathized with him because I knew what he did. And, he never harmed his country and so forth and so on, like they all claim. He did a lot of good. And he did what I was doing in some sense with film. In my smaller way, he was doing on an enormous scale, but it was too enormous for them to understand. People jumped on his case, and they... As you know, they personalized it. But, on the larger context, you said the new Cold War. But, I would say what Cold War? It was us who started this Cold War. We started the first one back in 1947, as you can see from Untold History. But the issue is there is no war. Russia wanted to be our partner. Russia really, really tried with Putin, who was a capitalist, to try to get along into this new world that he was seeing. And he was very adept at it. And we found constantly cause to dislike and to turn against him, and from abandoning the ABM treaty back in 2002. That was a huge mistake. And then expanding NATO, another huge mistake. We did everything to provoke them. They still stuck with us up until about 2007 with the Munich conference, when he finally said, "Don't you see this? There's a pattern here." He started to pick up on it. He was, in some ways, I found him to be kind of gullible. He thought I was tougher on the U.S. than he was, honestly.
That's
so,
funny.
I saw another man. No American has seen that man. They see a guy who's a monster. Same thing for China. Now, there's issues in China, but my God, we're picking fights we can't finish. And we added Iran and Venezuela to the bargain. We're nuts.
Right.
We are really losing touch with reality because we live inside a world in America where very few people seem to travel, seem to know what other people are thinking.
It's true.
And on top of it, we live in a fantasy world of cinema, of comic book heroes. This is very American. Good guy, bad guy kind of ridiculous thinking. All these soldiers come back from Iraq, Iran, or Iraq and Syria, and they say, good guy, bad guy. I mean, who are they kidding? I've been in war. I know what they're talking about. It's nonsense. It's a silly game. They're playing, they're imaginary targets in their head.
What's sad, too, is how that sort of mythology has come back, too, because it seems like the old sort of John Wayne
Well,
type.
yes, of course. Yeah.
And I think that you did a lot to kind of break that illusion, and that, society on a whole was really kind of more questioning of authority back in the 90s, for example.
It's interesting that Born on the 4th of July is hardly ever talked about, or Platoon, because if you really look at those two movies, you'll see that they're much more ambiguous than people remember them. But certainly the Tom Cruise's performance, questioning what war is and what men are doing in it, is profound, and it's very tragic, by the way. People resisted it back then, but it did very well. But why don't people talk about that? Because that is the price of war. When you see all these veterans now talking, about suicides in the veteran corps, what is it, 20 a day? I mean, it's an enormous amount. It's way above the national average. It's heartbreaking because we've been through it before with Vietnam. I mean, you're not old enough to remember. And we repeated the mentality again when we attacked Grenada, when we attacked Panama. Those were very small but apparent exercises in reestablishing American power.
We are entering into a new Cold War, it seems, where
We are.
history has been forgotten. People just forget about history. And actually, one of my favorite scenes in your interviews with Putin was when you were watching Dr. Strangelove with him, which I just found hilarious.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like the lessons of those times have just been totally forgotten by modern society.
It's really sad. It's really sad.
In regards to the Russia hysteria, what confuses me, I think, is just if you go back to the 2012 election, Barack Obama, one of his main lines of attack against Mitt Romney was that Mitt Romney had said that Russia was our number one geopolitical foe. And then sometime between 2012 and 2016, Democrats adopted that line, and now they're Romneyites.
Yeah.
What do you think it was that did that? Do you think it was Ukraine? Do you think it was Libya? Do you think it was Snowden? What do you think really led to that change?
It's a very good question, and we examine that, and we go into those details in Putin interviews. I ask him, when did this thing degenerate? But you start to see the pattern from 2000, from 99 on with Clinton and NATO. That's a big, but then it gets worse with Bush abandoning the ABM treaty. Really, that was a huge mistake.
And that was done under the premise of fighting terrorism, I believe.
Yeah, that was to say we have to abandon it because of the fears of Iran attacking Europe, which is always a premise. Well, when Iran was no longer available to really attack Europe, and we made a treaty with them, did they sign back on the ABM? No.
Right.
No, I mean, this anti-ballistic missile treaty is a linchpin for the Russians, and they saw it. And he said that, he warned about it. And what they did is they built up. They started to build up in 2002, 3, when they saw that when you take the ABM treaty away, which is, you have to understand the geographics of where Russia is. I mean, they're surrounded.
Right.
Alaska, the Pacific, less so in the north, but the United States is working overtime on NATO in Eastern Europe, and also with the Muslim fundamentalists. We've been working since the Reagan days to excite them, to turn them against Russia. Russia is a very heterogeneous country with a huge Muslim population. I don't know the exact figure, somewhere close to 20%. They're like France. So the American CIA and all their have been working since the war in Afghanistan to get those people to revolt. It doesn't work because they are integrated into the Russian society. Moscow itself has got a large Muslim population. Putin's basic concern, he phrased it very well in the interviews. He said, you guys don't realize that Damascus, which they almost had, the head choppers, ISIS, the Americans supported, people had almost control of Damascus. Almost. I mean, 2015 when the Russians came in. That far away. If they had Damascus, if you take the distance to Sochi, which is in southern Russia, which is let's say the Putin's summer quarters, whatever, it's 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles is from roughly L.A. to Seattle or Paris to Rome. 1,000 miles. It's nothing. You understand that the danger of the Arab world becoming fundamentalist, and it would spread up to the Caucasus into Russia. It was a real direct threat. That's why he's in Syria. They had an alliance with Syria going back to the 1970s, but he's in Syria for the same reasons we would go into Mexico if we felt that there was some foe in Mexico that was threatening our way of life. This is not about aggrandizing an empire. He knows the score. He knows Russia is a small economy. I mean, I don't think people listen to those interviews. They don't want to listen. That's my answer to your question. I don't think we want to look at back. You say Ukraine. Ukraine is just an excuse because we knew that. Listen, Russia annexed Ukraine. They had very strong reasons to do that because the Crimean people wanted them there. There was absolutely no violence in that annexation, not at all. Whereas there was quite deal of violence in Ukraine because that was a coup d'état initiated essentially and carried through, heavily supported by the United States to a huge amount of money, and as a result, Ukraine's in chaos, complete chaos. But it's a very dangerous situation because they moved on the Russian colonies, the old Russian Crimea, which always had belonged to Russia and been part of Russia. Russian-speaking people. They had laws banning the Russian language for a few days until the European Union said, "Don't get rid of those laws." In other words, it was a very strongly hostile Russian attitude, and those people were being killed in Donbass, Luhansk, Crimea. They would have been killed, as they were killed in Odessa. Those people were burned to death, and it was ugly. And these people took their self-defense into mind, and the Parliament of Crimea, I remember that day, they passed these laws, and they said, we don't want to be part of this. It's an undemocratic coup. We didn't have an election, and we have no say in this new government. So that's why they said we asked the Russians in. So, but that's where we can argue this all day and night. But the point is, what did America do? In a sense, we've annexed part of Syria. Right. Recently, we've admitted, look, we're controlling a huge chunk of Syria because of the oil.
Taking the oil.
But, who gave us the right? We weren't even invited into Syria. Right. Crimea invited Russia in. I mean, it's so hypocritical. In other words, every one of these cases falls apart if you go into them. So I don't know when it starts. It starts in 1999, but it progresses and it finds. There was all the hawks came in. John McCain. He was at the Munich conference, smirking at Putin. And then when you find all these incidents that happen, it's the attitude is very bizarre, as you say. Romney, I thought Obama made his point very well with Romney.
I mean, John Kerry went after him. Madeleine Albright went after him.
That was late, though, when Romney said that. I mean, Romney represents a point of view which is very dumb and American and isolated from the world. It's always been there. That's always going to be there. This is isolationist, dumb view. At least Trump, I mean, we can talk about him, but Trump is really, in a sense, the only thing I could say positive about Trump is he's so vulgar and he's done so much harm to the environment, and there are the laws breaking the treaties of Paris and Iran. I mean, the only good thing he's done is he just is smart enough not to want more wars. And in that sense, I think people are fed up with these wars, fed up with the Democrats. They're going to lose because of this. If the Democrats are only interested in supporting the Syria annexation and going further into Syria, getting rid of, in other words, regime change, the old Hillary Clinton word, that's what the Democrats are about. Some of the Republicans to some degree, but at least they've been tempered to. But I don't like either party. That's why Joe Stein was my vote back in 2016.
Well, I don't know if it's unfortunate just because this neo-McCarthyism has seeped into our national conversation so much. Have you been following the Green Party nomination all for this year?
No.
I had Howie Hawkins on my show, and he actually repeated some of these Russiagate talking points, saying that Trump colluded with Russia. And
did he?
Yeah, and so that was
people believe it, It's just nonsense. It was nonsense then. I was talking to Putin about it, and it was just. He said it very well. He says, "This is American internal affairs politics. This is what it's about," and it's remained that to me. I mean, the fact that they didn't interview Julian Assange at all, and on contrary, driving him crazy to the point of probably suicide or death. It indicates something's very wrong. Mueller doesn't wake up. He doesn't investigate. He doesn't investigate the computer at the DNC. All the smart people are telling us it was obviously it was what do they call it when you steal it the thumb drive? I forgot the name of it.
It was they're saying it was a leak instead of a hack, right? It was a local file download.
I mean, I believe it was definitely a leak. It was given to the DNC,
and Bill Binney and Ray McGovern have spoken out about
I'm
that.
at Bill Binney corner. I know Bill from the Snowden affair. He's smart as a whip. And Ray McGovern, they're smart people. These people have been in this business. But also you talk to those people who are sophisticated. I mean, even Bob Woodward, who we disagree on a lot of things, but he even said this is a joke.
Right.
You got to go line up all the people who say it's a joke, but it's the media, the Post, the Times, they keep at it. And the networks, obviously. So they keep at it. It's some kind of... You wonder in this case if it really is this military-industrial complex with the money that is at stake. I mean, obviously they're interested in promoting conflict, tension, the strategy of tension. I don't know if they want to go to real war because they'd be crazy. The Russians built themselves up since 2002 a lot, and we saw a sampling of their weaponry. It would be foolish to go to any kind of conflict with them because they're going to fight. And they are fighters. They proved it through history in World War II. There's no way you're going to take on Russia. They can put up with a lot, but we have pushed them to the edge. And I warned about that. We have to be a little bit more careful in our words and what we do in the world. And I think Ukraine is obviously a button point. So is China. We have pressure. We have troops. We have submarines all over the Arctic. Northern Russia. Pacific. We are really surrounding them.
Just makes you wonder what they're thinking. What is the end game?
Well, they're concerned. The Black Sea. We had 2 incidents in the Black Sea in the last 2-3 years. I tried to show one of them in the Putin interview. I would be very concerned that it can go at any moment. One day, there'll be a bomb. You know about it. You hear about it, and then you don't know what happened. It's that kind of a fear that hovers over me after having grown up in the atomic age. I mean, it's kind of amazing that we're back to this. I never had that fear in the 90s or the 80s.
Yeah, it's really astonishing, and it's sad how I think a lot of Hollywood figures have gone along with it. I mean, you see Rob Reiner and Morgan Freeman saying that we're at war.
What occurred to me is that, we've always seen America come together whenever we've been attacked, whether it's been Pearl Harbor or 9/11. Here we are attacked by a foreign power, and we don't come together. We are so divided as a country that I started to reach essentially across the aisle to my Republican friends and people who I respect, and found out that they are just as mortified as I am that we as a country have not come together over being attacked by, like I say, a foreign enemy power. So David and James Clapper and Max Boot and a number of other people have said, yes, this is something we need to do.
It's sad because you would think that other folks would remember the Cold War and would not want to repeat those mistakes.
I don't know. I mean, I know Rob's asked me a lot of stuff about the JFK assassination. He understands finally what happened, and I think he's very smart about that. We never talked about the Russia thing, but I know him. He's a smart guy, but I'm amazed that he believes this. Of course, he's a Democrat, and he's a strong Democrat.
I think that's what it is. It seems as though partisanship just kind of overwhelms people's thinking, and Trump is bad, so anything bad that you can say about Trump is therefore true.
Yeah. But I do believe, call me a nut or whatever they want, I do believe, contrary to what these people are saying, that there was a definite attempt to keep Trump out of office. When he said that he was willing to talk to the Russians and do deals with them, what's wrong with Russia kind of thing, that really I never thought it would get that crazy with Brennan and Clapper. Clapper was in the Snowden affair, as you remember.
Right.
People know all this. There's smart people like you are around there. They follow these things, and they know how the deep state works. The so-called deep state. You can call it whatever you want. There was a deep state back in Kennedy's day.
Right.
There's these people that think that they can override no better than the people who, and or I don't know what the right word is, no better than, that they can act without approval, that they can act with their
Well,
own.
it's like a permanent bureaucracy, right? And I believe that's, Putin said to you several times that the president's change, but the policy never does.
That's very clear. But I think Trump got himself into a lot of hot water, and he's had a big mouth, and he's pissed off so many people that they're all joining in at some point. The impeachment thing is like boring and ridiculous, and it may happen, it may not, but it's going to completely, it doesn't matter. It's already ruining the country and will ruin the election year, and it will, all these false issues will come up. I got a letter from a Republican organization blasting the Democrats, but saying that, and somewhere in the letter saying that Trump had done something against the Russians, and they were very proud of that.
Right.
I mean, how do you? It makes no sense,
Yeah, it's for either party. Peace is bad, right? You have to be tough. You have to stand up to Russia and China and Iran. And
but where do we get this mentality? It's like the Old West. We're still vigilantes. This Sally McNeil, Arizona senator, is that her name? She sends me letters asking for money, and she's in the letter. She's proud of her combat experience as a pilot in Iraq, and she's saying we're at war with the Russians and with China, and we have to be,
and everyone
and everyone, and we have to be giving her more money so that she can defend our country because the Democrats are weak-kneed. I've heard this all my life,
It's insane. What are your thoughts on Tulsi Gabbard?
I like Tulsi. I've talked to her, and I like her a lot. I just think, she should be listened to. She's very effective. She knows what she wants. She's a determined young woman, and she's smart. She listens. Yes, it's hard to negotiate that channel to the presidency when the press, the mainstream press, is so against her.
Right.
So again, it shows you how. Why are they so enamored of the military-industrial? Why are they so enamored of American power? American power has been misused for so many years since World War II. We've got to curb American power. We've got to get along with people. We've got to be Switzerland for a change. And I mean that. And we have to get away from this use of... It's an arrogance that we have about the world. And a Russian emigre who was driving a cab in New York told me once, I was talking to him about where he came from, blah, blah. And I said, he came here during the 80s. He's an older man now. And I said, what is it, the first thing you noticed in America that was different from your homeland? And you know what he said? I thought he summed it all up. He said, your superiority, your sense of superiority. So he says that it was like when you came here, you felt like you were better than. Maybe that was his own complexes, but there is that sense of superiority we exude. And it's an arrogance that's going to take our empire, our so-called empire, down into the gutter and may destroy many people with it. It's arrogance. It always happens. Pride cometh before the fall. I worry about that. But it's basic history. Empires crumble under, as Martin Luther King, the oceans, the tides of the oceans are, when the tides of the oceans are full of hate, empires crumble, something like that.
Well, let me ask you, just because, I think that you have a really good analysis of the deep state or of this permanent bureaucracy. If Tulsi Gabbard were to somehow magically get elected, do you think that she would be able to even change anything?
It'd be a good question. She'd probably be assassinated. I mean, I'm surprised Trump was not assassinated, and Trump has now resorted to building, I guess, his base into a hard right-wing base, which is scary too, but I'm not worried about him becoming a dictator because of the so-called deep state, who are now, they're proud of it. I noticed the other week that John McLaughlin testified that the deep state was a good thing because it made it, and I'm sure that Brennan agrees, and Clapper and these guys, as well as Hillary Clinton, who God knows she's a bad one, she's the one who suggested this Russian thing, I guess, or pushed it. And
well, her campaign was telling people about it at the Democratic National Convention before.
And these people. John McCain was a monster, too. Do you ever read that magazine? You should read it. McGarrison, my friend Jim DiEugenio, who's working with me on the Kennedy, we're doing a JFK documentary, and they're tying up all the loose ends that we can. And then there are a lot of loose ends that came out after 1991 when the Assassination Records Review Board, they found out a lot of stuff, details, as well as some other things that happened. Anyway, we're trying to put it in one place. D. Eugenio puts out Garrison, which is an interesting magazine, covert, like the old Covert Quarterly. In it, he goes into McCain's history. I didn't know McCain's history to this detail about the guys in Vietnam who were in the prison, what they said about him.
What did they say about him?
Songbird. Bad. It was a really. I'm just telling you, it's considering how strange McCain's behavior was over so many years. It just seems that something happened over there that really lost his mind. I never found him to be sane when he was running for president. I thought one of the biggest disasters for this country was when it was so clear that when Obama was running against McCain, I thought, let's win this thing. Obama should win this thing on the national security issue because that's
Right.
where Obama was going.
Right.
That was a big,
Well, he was running against the war.
was running against national security too. The whole concept of it, which is what McCain was pushing.
Right.
It was the same argument. Obama's weak.
Right.
He's going to cave, and they're still pushing that argument. But what happened was that when Bush's economy completely collapsed in September, which was a month before, 2 months before the election, it was over. We knew Obama would win because it had to become a Democratic issue with the economy.
Right.
And nobody's discussed national security between September 11th, September whatever it was, 15th, 17th, I forget, September and November. Nobody discussed national security. That issue disappeared. And that's a shame because then it became, when Obama's presidency got suddenly focused on fixing this meltdown. Those are long-term consequences. But why did I get to McCain? Because of, anyway, I just was pointing out a new magazine that's on the market, Garrison.
Well, something I'd like to ask you about George W. Bush is just because he was in the news recently with this whole Ellen DeGeneres thing and her kind of, apologizing for him. And did you follow that whole scandal?
No, I didn't. Not much detail.
Well, it seems to me as though George W. Bush has been somewhat rehabilitated, and his war crimes have even been forgotten. I mean, so it seems as though the media in Hollywood, to some degree, is really just facilitating this, where they're just allowing for kind of forgetting the lessons of the past and making war crimes in the future
the media
possible.
has a lot to say, has a lot to pay for. And who the media is, it's, as somebody has pointed out, a lot of those editors, a lot of the people who run it are the people who put us in Iraq, people who were pro-Iraq war. They never apologized.
Right.
They never understood the degree of disaster that was brought to the Middle East. I mean, this is what America did there. It was so wrong. And then they spread the cancer to Syria and Libya. Libya was a huge mistake, too, which has resulted in so many refugees and a complete destabilization of Africa. We put troops all over Africa. It got so much worse under Bush. So much. It was bad, I would argue, before.
Sure.
I don't think George Bush's father there's reasons he should not have gone into the Kuwait war at that time, and it could have been negotiated. But that's,
But again, it seems to me like in the
after
90s...
2000, something happened that was really wrong, and the justices, I remember Scalia, is that pronounced? Scalia, God, I remember him gloating about that, get over it. It wasn't that, it was really a violation, most basic violation of our Constitution. The way that was done, the Supreme Court jumping in there to prevent a vote that was going to go against Bush. You were saying, I'm sorry.
Looking forward, what do you think is going to be the trajectory of this neo-McCarthyism? Do you think it's going to last just through the Trump years? Do you think that it's something that's going to last for decades? Are we in, a new 70-year Cold War?
Against who? How can we win it? Russia and China will go their own way. It's just how much we get. We lose our confidence. We get scared of things that don't require us to get scared, and we get over. America's always gotten hysterical over issues ever since I remember, whether it was Vietnam, Watergate, this, that. There's always a new issue. This is the way our system works.
But again, I think like in the 80s and the 90s, people questioned a little bit more. But then, just the gradual increase from there to now, where it's, yes, we need to be everywhere all the time and stopping terrorism and rogue states and anyone else.
It's never put to a vote, actually. It's never really put to a vote because you can control the media, it seems. The media has gone. I mean, there is an alternate media, by the way.
Yes.
And that's what I live off it. I mean, without the internet, I wouldn't even be aware of half the stuff I'm telling you.
But there's pushback against that even. I
Of
mean,
course
people
there
are
is.
being
But I'm saying
censored,
that's the only hope.
deplatformed.
I don't see any hope in reading any damn newspaper in this whole country. You can get on, fly across the country, pick up a Denver paper, a Miami paper, a Buffalo paper, a New York, and a Washington. It's all one story.
Right.
I turn on the news, it's a bore. Because I know, once you know the point of view and where it's coming from, you're listening to the same story over again and told it's in more and more minor and threatening ways to make people scared. Make people scared, you get them to vote for this national security state that we have. How do you get out of this thing? That's the question you're asking. Occasionally senators come along, congressmen, they question it.
Right, and then they get demonized like Tulsi
And
Gabbard.
Obama questioned it to some degree, and what happened? He just got mowed down, I guess. So, we have a fundamental problem in our soul is to be a bully. Are we a bully? Yes. Are we arrogant? Yes. Are we going to beat up more Indians? Yes. Let's try to do it in a way where we stay out of a disaster for a war. If we push Russia, yes, it's going to be bad. If we push China, it's going to be awful. If we push even Venezuela, they're not going to go down the way we think they're going to roll over. They're not. They're tough. I've been down there several times, and as you know, I think Chavez was quite an inspiration for all of Latin America, as we know, and he led and it's coming back. I mean, it's not going to go away. You can't kill the people. You can't kill people. This I know. This is a fact of history. So you always have this tyranny from above, sometimes oppressive, I suppose. And it's the people that have to fight it. Now, how does that work? That's messy. Revolution, you can talk about that. A lot of people are going to get hurt. A lot of good people, too. So, I guess I'm an observer at this point. I'm in my 70s, I've seen so much that upset me, but I realize that's the nature of life. Everyone who's lived in his time has seen tragedy and glory too, but seen a lot of tragedy, and people accept that. They go on. My grandfather was French. He was in World War I. He saw all the disaster of World War I. He saw World War II then, and he was an old man. How did he feel?
That's true.
France was occupied by the Germans and split in two. My grandfather didn't have a bad bone, but he certainly saw people in France who had bad bones. I mean, they had bad bones. They were collaborators. They would turn in Jews, So you live with history, which is tragedy. Hopefully, I have an optimist spirit from my mother, and you see somehow we get through it. We hope and get to the other side, but a lot of casualties.
Well, for an aspiring filmmaker out there who wants to make the kinds of films that you did that would get people to question authority, do you think that it's possible for them in today's Hollywood, or do they have to go kind of do it themselves and make independent films?
It's very hard in today's Hollywood. Yeah, the Hollywood is a money-making corporation, and you can criticize, you can do a film about the poison in the waters of DuPont, or you could criticize like Monsanto. I think you could get away with some of that stuff. Definitely. You could make corporate responsibility an issue. I think you can do minor political things, protest things, but I don't see anything major that's doable, financeable. That was a very weird moment when I got the JFK financing from Warner Brothers, because they wanted me. I had come off of Born on 4th of July and Wall Street, and they really wanted me. So I said, I want to do a murder mystery. And they said, great. And I sold them the JFK, which I really didn't know all the implications of what I was doing either, but I sold it to them as this is a great, tense story. Who killed him? And how did it go down? They loved that. So we made the movie, and I made it 3 hours and 10 minutes. It's a lot. And I made it without too much interference at all, because the secret was they wanted to make Christmas of '91, and I really knew that there was a lot at stake here. If I could rush it and get it ready, they would take it for that time. If it had been set for a '92 release, there was no way I would get through that. I would have been tested. It would have been previewed to death. And by the way, it's a complicated film, and a lot of people would say, I don't understand that. And, they would have been. Then the committee comes in, the committee of 10 or whatever, and they start the fixing. So I can't, don't, I would say to a younger filmmaker, if you really wanted an active rebellion, would be to do something. You have to do it at a budget. You have to figure out a way to do it and make it sharp, man. You have to write it in a way that it really flies and hits people. I would say Battle of Algiers, back in its time, was a very relatively low-budget film made by Italians and French, and about a real situation, as you know, really making it as real as possible. It can be done, but it's such a long shot, such a long shot. I would say the door is still open, but you have to be very smart.
Will you be making any dramatic films?
I don't think so. I don't think they want me. I think it's been very hard for me, and television too. I mean, it's in some ways it's an illusion that you have more freedom on television. Yeah, you have freedom to do what they want to make their money that they think, and they're more controlling in some ways.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So, are you focusing?
We didn't get through our Guantanamo series. We tried, didn't get through. It's about some of the injustices at Guantanamo.
Yeah, I can definitely see where there would be censorship around there.
Everything critical in the major way, which is the way I play,
right,
is suspect.
It's unfortunate, because there's so much important things to say, and it seems like they're just giving you less and less space to do that. Are you going to be focusing primarily on documentaries moving forward?
Yeah. I am working on about the future. On a documentary about this JFK, and I'm doing a memoir. I did a memoir which is going to be published next year. Houghton Mifflin, they've announced it. I'm finishing editing it now. It'll come out next year. It's about my early years more than but it's the act of memoir is very important to me, and I really want to remember the things that happened in my life. As you can see from my talk with you, I just want to remember these things, and I want to write about them and analyze them further. So actually I learned a lot writing this memoir because I'd forgotten a lot, so I had to go through all the old documents, this, that, finding out things that I'd forgotten, and rethinking everything. So I'm really, this is a good period of my life if I can, to honor the past.
Wonderful. Well, Oliver Stone, I really do appreciate you sitting down with me and doing this interview. And for folks out there, how can they just stay up to date with your projects and anything else that you might be working on?
Well, I guess Facebook type of thing or Twitter. I mean, I don't really do that much of it, but it does get out in some ways, This JFK documentary was announced, but it hasn't been distributed. There is no American distributor yet. We'll see.
Awesome. Well, I'll be looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
I'll call on you if we need help.
Okay. Sounds good.